Kirk Douglas was in the middle of filming the most dangerous stunt of his career when a studio executive walked onto the set and told everyone to pack up and go home. What Kirk did in the next 60 seconds didn't just save the production. It sent a message to every powerful man in Hollywood that Kirk Douglas would never be controlled. And the executive who tried to shut him down, he never worked in the industry again. It was October 14th, 1957. The Arizona desert outside Tucson was baking under a 112-degree sun. Kirk Douglas and his crew were 3 weeks into production on a Western that the studio had been trying to kill since the first day of shooting. The film was called The Last Stand, and it was supposed to be Kirk's most personal project yet. A story about a man who refuses to compromise his principles, even when it costs him everything. The studio hated it. To understand what happened on that set, you need to understand what Hollywood looked like in 1957. The studio system was dying, but it wasn't dead yet. The men who ran the major studios still believed they owned their actors. They controlled the scripts, the directors, the budgets, and most importantly, they controlled who worked and who didn't. An actor who caused too much trouble could find himself blackballed, unable to get a meeting anywhere in town. Kirk Douglas had been causing trouble since 1949. He had broken contracts. He had started his own production company when actors simply didn't do that. He had demanded script approval, casting approval, final cut approval. He had fought with directors, producers, and studio heads. He had earned a reputation as the most difficult actor in Hollywood, and he wore that reputation like a badge of honor. "I am probably the most disliked actor in Hollywood," Kirk once said, "and I feel pretty good about it, because that's me." But The Last Stand was different. This wasn't just another film for Kirk Douglas. This was the story he had been trying to tell for years. The story of a man who stands alone against a corrupt system, who refuses to bend even when bending would be easier, who chooses death over compromise. It was in many ways Kirk's own story. The production had been troubled from the start. The studio, Metropolitan Pictures, had agreed to finance the film only after Kirk threatened to take the project to a competitor. They had assigned a budget that Kirk considered insultingly low. They had tried to replace his chosen director with a studio hack. They had demanded script changes that would have gutted the film's message. Kirk had fought every battle. He had won most of them. But the studio hadn't given up. They were just waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came on October 14th. The scene they were shooting was the film's climax. Kirk's character, a former lawman named John Kerrigan, faces down a group of corrupt businessmen who have been terrorizing a small town. The scene required Kirk to ride a horse at full gallop toward a line of armed men, then leap from the saddle and take cover behind a water trough as bullets flew around him. It was dangerous. Kirk had insisted on doing it himself. The stunt coordinator, a veteran named Bill Harmon, had spent 3 days preparing for this shot. They had positioned cameras at multiple angles. They had rehearsed the timing until everyone knew exactly what to do. They had even dug a trench behind the water trough so Kirk would have somewhere to land safely. Kirk was mounted on his horse, waiting for the signal to begin, when he saw the black sedan approaching across the desert. It was trailing a cloud of dust that seemed to stretch for miles. Even from a distance, Kirk knew what it meant. Someone from the studio was coming, and they weren't coming to wish him luck. The sedan stopped at the edge of the set. A man in a gray suit stepped out, brushing dust from his shoulders with evident distaste. His name was Franklin Marsh, and he was Metropolitan Pictures' head of production. He was the man who had tried to kill this project a dozen times, the man who had called Kirk Douglas a cancer on the film industry, the man who had sworn that The Last Stand would never be completed. Kirk watched Marsh walk toward the director's chair. He watched Marsh lean in and whisper something to the director, a man named Paul Kavanaugh, who had been Kirk's first choice from the beginning. He watched Kavanaugh's face go pale. Then Marsh turned to face the crew and raised his voice so everyone could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, production on this film is suspended effective immediately. You will all receive your final paychecks by the end of the week. Please collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises by sundown. The silence that followed was absolute. Crew members looked at each other in confusion. The camera operators stepped back from their equipment. Even the horses seemed to sense that something was wrong. Kirk Douglas dismounted slowly. He handed the reins to a nearby wrangler and walked toward Franklin Marsh. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. His face was calm, but anyone who knew Kirk Douglas knew that calm was the most dangerous sign of all. He stopped about 3 feet from Marsh. The two men were roughly the same height, but Kirk seemed larger somehow. There was an energy radiating from him, a coiled intensity that made the air itself feel electric. "Frank," Kirk said quietly, "what do you think you're doing?" Marsh smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "I'm shutting down your little vanity project, Kirk. The board met this morning. We've decided to cut our losses. We have a contract. Contracts can be broken, especially when the production is over budget and behind schedule." Kirk's eyes narrowed. "We're under budget, and we're 2 days ahead of schedule." "That's not what my reports say." "Then your reports are lying, just like you're lying right now." The crew was watching this exchange with growing unease. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. This was a confrontation between two worlds, two ways of understanding what movies were supposed to be. Franklin Marsh represented the old Hollywood, the studio system, the belief that actors were employees who did what they were told. Kirk Douglas represented something new, something dangerous. Kirk Marsh said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "You need to accept reality. This film is never going to be released. Even if you finish shooting, we'll bury it. We'll put it in a vault somewhere and forget it exists. You can fight all you want, but in the end, the studio always wins." Kirk was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, but carried clearly across the silent set. "Frank, I'm going to give you one chance to get back in your car and drive away. One chance to pretend this conversation never happened. Because if you don't, I'm going to finish this scene. And then I'm going to finish this film. And then I'm going to make sure that everyone in Hollywood knows exactly what kind of man Franklin Marsh really is." Marsh laughed. "You're threatening me? Kirk, I could end your career with a phone call. Then make the call." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kirk Douglas stood there, covered in dust, wearing the costume of a fictional lawman, and he was absolutely terrifying. Not because of his physical presence, though that was considerable, but because of the certainty in his eyes, the absolute refusal to back down. Marsh hesitated. For the first time, something flickered across his face that might have been doubt. Kirk pressed his advantage. "You think I'm afraid of you, Frank? You think I'm afraid of your board of directors? Let me tell you something. I grew up with nothing. My father was a ragman, the lowest job you could have. I've been hungry. I've been broke. I've been told 1,000 times that I would never amount to anything. And I'm still here, still making movies, still telling the stories I want to tell. You can't scare me because I've already survived worse than anything you could do." He took a step closer to Marsh. The studio executive actually flinched. "Now," Kirk continued, "you have 2 choices. You can get back in your car and let us finish our work, or you can stand here and watch me do it anyway. Because I promise you, Frank, I promise you on everything I am, this film is getting made. The only question is whether you're going to be remembered as the man who tried to stop it." The silence stretched on. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Finally, Franklin Marsh turned and walked back to his sedan. He didn't say another word. He just got in the car and drove away, leaving that same trail of dust hanging in the desert air. Kirk watched him go. Then he turned back to the crew. "All right," he said. "Let's shoot this scene." The crew burst into motion. Cameras were repositioned. The stunt coordinator ran through the final safety checks. Kirk climbed back onto his horse, and 20 minutes later, they captured one of the most spectacular action sequences in the history of Western films. But the story didn't end there. When Kirk returned to Los Angeles after the shoot, he discovered that Franklin Marsh had kept his word. The studio was refusing to complete post-production. They were denying access to editing facilities, sound stages, everything needed to turn raw footage into a finished film. Kirk Douglas didn't panic. He didn't negotiate. He did something that no actor had ever done before. He called a press conference. Standing in front of reporters from every major newspaper and wire service, Kirk Douglas told the whole story. He talked about the studio's attempts to sabotage production. He talked about Franklin Marsh's visit to the set. He talked about the decades-long practice of studios burying films they didn't like, denying audiences the chance to decide for themselves what was worth watching. The story exploded. Newspapers across the country ran headlines about Kirk Douglas's battle against the studio system. Letters poured into Metropolitan Pictures from angry moviegoers demanding that The Last Stand be released. Theater owners who made their money from ticket sales pressured the studio to reconsider. Within 2 weeks, Metropolitan Pictures announced that they would complete post-production on The Last Stand after all. They tried to spin it as their decision, as if they had always planned to release the film, but everyone knew the truth. Kirk Douglas had won. The film opened in March of 1958 to strong reviews and solid box office. It wasn't Kirk's biggest hit, but it was the one he was proudest of. Years later, when interviewers asked about his most memorable moment in Hollywood, Kirk would often mention that day in the Arizona desert. "I learned something important that day," Kirk said in a 1972 interview. "I learned that powerful men are only powerful because we agree to let them be. The moment you stop being afraid of them, they have nothing left." Franklin Marsh thought he could shut down my film because that's what studio executives had always done. But he forgot something. He forgot that I grew up on Eagle Street in Amsterdam, New York, the toughest neighborhood in the toughest town in the state. Franklin Marsh was a bully, and I've been dealing with bullies my whole life. Franklin Marsh resigned from Metropolitan Pictures 6 months after the incident. The official story was that he wanted to pursue other opportunities. But insiders knew the truth. The board had lost confidence in him after the public relations disaster of The Last Stand. He had tried to destroy Kirk Douglas and destroyed himself instead. Marsh never worked in the film industry again. He died in 1984, largely forgotten. His obituary mentioned his years at Metropolitan Pictures, but said nothing about Kirk Douglas or The Last Stand. Kirk Douglas, meanwhile, went on to make more than 40 more films. He produced, directed, and continued to fight for the projects he believed in. He became known as the actor who couldn't be controlled, the man who would rather walk away from everything than compromise his principles. That reputation was built on many battles, but the foundation was laid on October 14, 1957, in the Arizona desert, when Kirk Douglas looked a studio executive in the eye and refused to blink. The crew members who were there that day told the story for years afterward. It became legend in Hollywood circles. The day Kirk Douglas stood up to Franklin Marsh. The day an actor proved that the studios weren't as powerful as everyone thought. Bill Harmon, the stunt coordinator, lived until 2003. Shortly before his death, a film historian asked him about that day in Arizona. Bill's eyes lit up with the memory. "I've worked with a lot of tough guys in my career," Bill said. "John Wayne, Burt Lancaster, Lee Marvin. But I never saw anything like what Kirk Douglas did that day." Franklin Marsh was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. He could make or break careers with a word, and Kirk just looked at him like he was nothing, like he was dust. Bill paused, remembering. "You know what Kirk said to me after Marsh drove away? He said, 'Billy, there's only one thing those guys understand: strength. You show them any weakness, any fear, and they'll eat you alive. But if you stand your ground, if you make them believe that you'd rather die than back down, then they've got nothing. Because at the end of the day, all they have is the fear they can put in your heart. And I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to be afraid of anyone. Bill shook his head slowly. That's who Kirk Douglas was. The man who wasn't afraid of anyone. And that day in Arizona, he proved it to the whole world. The Last Stand is still available today. Film historians consider it one of Kirk Douglas's most personal works, a reflection of his own battles against the Hollywood establishment. When you watch the climactic scene, the one they shot right after Franklin Marsh drove away, you can see something in Kirk's performance that goes beyond acting. You can see a man who has just won a fight, a man who knows exactly who he is and refuses to be anything else. That's Kirk Douglas, the ragman's son who became a legend, the most disliked actor in Hollywood, who changed the industry forever. And on October 14, 1957, in the Arizona desert, he showed everyone exactly why.